Good morning, all. Welcome to our Transformative Mission Outcome panel. I'm Lakshmi Ashok, and I'll be your moderator today. I am the VP of Enterprise Management Systems within Leidos, and also a veteran at cloud, having driven many cloud implementations within the federal government. I've worked with a lot of solutions, innovative solutions, and also at the same time addressed challenges implementing cloud, such as governance, contractual, RMF, and others. I've also worked on implementing many solutions across multi-cloud to govern, orchestrate, and migrate applications into the cloud while working with cloud-native solutions. In my role today at Leidos, I work on the alignment of our tech investments with customer priorities. And as such, I drive into programs, innovations, to help our customers with their digital transformation journey securely, at speed, and at scale. But enough about me. We're joined by a distinguished set of panelists today. And I welcome you panelists to our stage. So let me start off with Tyson. I should have arranged my thing in order. Tyson Walker is the Acting Cloud Migration and Architecture Division Director for the CBP Passenger Systems Program Directorate. Mason McDaniel serves as the Chief Technology Officer for Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Gabe Chuli is the Cloud Senior Technical Advisor within Information Technology Directorate at National Ground Intelligence Center. And Peter O'Donoghue is the Civil Group CTO at Leidos and is responsible for driving innovation throughout the portfolio of the Civil Group. So welcome again, panelists. And I would like you to spend a minute or so just going into what you do on a day basis. So Tyson, we'll start with you.
Thanks for having me. I am the Acting Division Director, as you said, for CBP, OIT, Passenger Systems, so lots of levels, of course, in the government. So basically right now, Passenger Systems is the group that handles all of the primary and secondary processing for travelers coming in and out of the country. So as you can imagine, we have a lot of volume of data. A lot of travelers come in and out every day. So we maintain all of those systems, and right now we're trying to get them all into the cloud from our on-prem data center. So we've got about a 2-year time horizon. I don't manage any of the applications themselves, so I'm sort of trying to herd all the cats in all the application teams and get them up to the cloud.
Thanks, Tyson. Mason?
Mason McDaniel, Chief Technology Officer of ATF, and really my day-to-day job for several years has really been focused on cloud and trying to get our really, really old infrastructure modernized to the point that it was cloud capable and migrating the applications into the cloud. So we have quite a few apps that were really we analyzed all of them, broke them down into 3 kind of major portfolios. The first one we managed to go live with a while ago. Last December, we went live with the second and by far the largest and hardest of them. And so I'd be sharing some of the lessons learned today from that.
Love to hear
And we're
more.
working on the final portfolio now, which will allow us to officially shut our data center down when we're finished with that one. That will be the last of our applications.
Cool. Gabe.
Hey everybody, Gabe Chuli. I am the Army Intelligence Cloud Service Provider. So we provide cloud services across the board for, generally speaking, the Army Intelligence core capabilities throughout the DoD. So we work closely with the intelligence community across the board on helping place their applications and capabilities into the cloud. But then previous to this, I was migrating large cloud application into the cloud. So look forward to talking.
Peter.
And yeah, good morning. I'm Peter. Actually, I'm the group CTO for the Civil Group within Leidos. We're, I think, north of a $3 billion a year organization, very diverse. We do everything from running the systems and software for the FAA We run the longest supply chain supporting life and science on the ice in the Antarctic for the NSF. We do a lot of folks may know us as an enterprise IT kind of 800-pound gorilla, which obviously we do that within civil. But we also have, for those of you who've been through the airports, you'll notice in the last year that the ProVision devices that you walk through, the people scanners, also have the Leidos logo on there. So that business is part of civil. And we also have, probably hundreds and hundreds of electrical engineers that do nothing but evolve transmission and distribution, electrical utility stuff. So my job is to support this business, to drive innovation through it. And actually, I think one of the most fun part of my jobs is recognizing as cloud becomes ubiquitous and it comes to the edge, and it allows us to power the mission. I'm looking for opportunities, and I see lots of great opportunities to actually kind of amp up the power of very, very different missions across civil. So that's what I do.
Thank you. Wow, quite a bit of cloud experience amongst the four of you. So Mason, let's start with you first. I would like to hear about some really successful mission outcomes that you've had by driving cloud adoption.
Okay, one of the underlying principles that we laid in place before we started the cloud journey was that we couldn't boil the ocean, we couldn't fix every single application with a full BPR the way we wanted to in state. We had too much technical debt, would have been too many moving parts, there's no way we could have succeeded. So we really focused first on just taking the basic business processes that we had in place, rebuilding those on a modern framework in modern technologies that were cloud capable. But the real core in all of that was re-architecting it to try to modularize things to the extent possible, but also build everything around automation, automated testing, automated deployments, containerization, and try to set it up so that when we got to the cloud, it may have been the endpoint of the cloud migration journey, but it was really the starting point for continuous improvement. So we would be able to start making very rapid iterative cycles, and that's what we've seen. When we went live with the first small portfolio, one of the applications in that portfolio did not work and had some kind of core functionality issues that the users could not live with and would typically have caused a rollback. But because we had built everything around that automated pipeline process, and we had the system owners directly involved, they worked during the outage window. They worked with the development team, and they said, yeah, this isn't something we can live with permanently, but we could live without it for a day. So they identified the root cause of the problem, the developers fixed it, passed it through the automated test process, and we had the fixes to that deployed into production within hours of the issue being identified, and we were able to fall forward onto the modernized system instead of treating it as an entire rollback. Then when we went live with our second portfolio, we knew going into that one, that was going to be a really, really bumpy landing, because the way I put it is we took off the airplane before we built the nose gear. We knew that even the basic minimum functionality was not going to be done yet when we went live. And up to the director level, our executives took they prioritized going live in the cloud to the point they were willing to take impacts even across ATF mission for some period of time for us to get our feet under ourselves. So our goal was just to land the plane safely and then fix it. And in the first 7 days after go live, we made 21 production deployments.
Wow.
And we've averaged production deployments 91% of all work days in the 3 months since, averaging 8 new features deployed per day since. So the pace of change that we've been able to deliver, 100 users, simultaneous users, would bring their legacy systems to a performance standstill and shortly thereafter crash the system. A couple weeks ago, we hit 4,500 simultaneous users on the new one, which is small potatoes for some folks, but for some systems. But the way they were designed, it's 45 times improvement in performance throughput.
Thank you. How about you, Gabe?
Oof. So we took a little bit different approach when we went to the cloud. So we did a little bit of fundamental infrastructure as code kind of approach to building the cloud. And that was to make it so applications were really rapidly able to deploy and get an ATO. We call it like the ATO in a day kind of concept. You're inheriting everything. There's not a lot of work the tenants have to do to kind of build out the core capabilities, like, roles, permissions, IAM, all those various pieces. So When the Army side decided to go to the cloud, we, for some reason, chose the hardest, biggest project that we had, and we said, you know what, if we can do this, we can do any other project, I guess, was the idea behind it. So we moved a really, really large scale, probably the most complex multi-domain infrastructure and cloud capability into the cloud. And it was interesting because we were kind of building the cloud, that whole inheritance model, while building this application and you know, being on the various networks. There's only certain capabilities, you know, that from the cloud perspective that were available as we were rolling this thing out over multiple years. And the good part is it laid a nice framework for rapid capability deployment. So you know, in previous, you know, months or whatever, we've had from like an Intel perspective to have to meet mission requirements, we'd have to spin up, you know, multi-terabyte capability and be able to actually have an accredited solution within, you know, I'd call it an ATO today, because all the things were already pre-inherited, pre-established, and it was really, really helpful to be able to turn around a capability to the warfighter using kind of like native services, managed services, whatever it might be, and hand it back to data scientists and to the warfighter. That's kind of our big one.
Yeah, I wish I could hear more about it, but I don't think you can share too many specifics on that case. Tyson, tell us a little bit.
So the time to market is such a big thing with cloud. So, you know, obviously switching from years ago from waterfall to agile has helped that process. But our CBP cloud environment is very well managed. I don't know if anybody saw the presentation yesterday by Kyle Barnett, but his group, the CME team, they actually manage our CBP cloud environment. And so there's a lot of governance and structure built into our cloud environment. So application teams have a lot of freedom and flexibility once they onboard. I mean, there's a governance process for onboarding, but once they're there, they can request resources. And so just the overall time to market compared to on-premise has been really an amazing improvement. One of the applications that was just recently developed was in response to the Ukraine refugee situation. So we had an application, cloud-native application, developed in 6 days into production for processing Ukrainian refugees. So, I mean, it's a pretty amazing accomplishment. Probably never would have been able to do that, you know, on the existing infrastructure, the existing data center.
Yeah, I know sometimes, I know all of you have had to deal with policy changes, implementing policy changes overnight, literally, and that's where cloud is really going to shine. Right. Peter, can you tell us some of your experiences as an SI and how you've helped the client mission using cloud?
That's a great question, Lakshmi. Well, I think everybody in this audience and actually everybody in this panel, I mean, I think a lot of us do what we do for a living, right? Because we can apply technology, but really for the betterment of the nation, whether or not it's being able to kind of assure security of the nation or it's providing better citizen services, right? So I think your example of what we were able to do for Ukraine, I feel like, you know, as people adopt cloud and they adopt the automation and kind of better agile development processes, if you can kind of rewicker your governance processes and you can go faster and assume cloud, like I've always felt like, you know, the mission of government should never really have been constrained by the RMF or by SDLCs that are like really rigorous and very waterfall-y, right? I mean, I think, you know, I mean, maybe we should have written a memo to our bare-chested horse rider and to kind of wait to invade Ukraine. I mean, I'm just being really glib, right? But the point of it is we kind of need to get a release out, and it's going to take us 3 months. I mean, the world doesn't work. The mission of government doesn't wait, right? So the idea of being able to kind of go fast and pivot and get something out, and even if it's imperfect, I mean, the keynote yesterday of U.S. Postal Service was amazing, right? In my own experience, sorry, I'm probably banging into myself here. My own experience is obviously in a lifetime or two ago, being able to get a website out for drone registration for one of the transportation agencies in 6 weeks, where we had to integrate credit card, et cetera. Like, so this is where, I mean, I do think cloud and CI/CD and agile development, that kind of triumvirate together allows you to kind of really meet the mission need and actually to be able to kind of support the citizen service, the warfighter as necessary. I think it's a really exciting time to actually be in the business that we're in. So there'd be some examples. I can rattle off a few more, but.
Yeah, thank you. I think
Could
you
I
led me to.
follow up on that governance comment?
Yeah.
Because that is key. I want to make sure we don't miss that. So much of the discussion around cloud, around Agile, around everything is about the technologies, the daily rituals that you go through, that it's so easy to lose sight of the IT governance processes and how those have to change. And I infuriated one of my bosses one time when I made fun of his SDLC process by making a logo for it. It's a stylized anchor with a Latin translation for stagnation by documentation through the middle. He did not appreciate that, but the fundamental truth is it doesn't do you a damn bit of good if you can build a VM or a container in 5 minutes if it takes you 30, 60, 90 days to get it through your change control processes. So we spent, early in our cloud journey, I spent about a year trying to figure out how do we rewrite our IT policies to work with the cloud Agile environment. And ultimately we decided it was just fundamentally too different. And we started with just a ground blank page rewrite of our IT governance framework around the concepts of automated testing, continuous integration, continuous deployment environments, and rebuilding it around that. And one of the core fundamental concepts of that to try to drive culture is retaining the concept of a heavy change advisory board where they have to come ask permission to deploy to production if they have not built a mature CI/CD process. That's sort of the stick side. But if they have, and if they have good automated testing processes, good CI/CD pipeline processes, then they can document those processes in an automated deployment plan, bring that to the change advisory board, and we'll approve the process. And at that point, once that process is approved, they don't have to come ask our permission to deploy anything to production. They could deploy 100 times a day if they want to. They just notify the board. They update the changes to the CMDB so that we have record of it. But the governance changes have to happen or you're not going to be able to realize the benefits of the Agile and cloud.
Mason, you just teed me beautifully into my second question, which was all around this cannot be easy. You've had to face some setbacks. So what have your challenges been? So you've started that. Let's ask Gabe what some of his challenges have been.
Some of the challenges?
In adopting cloud?
Oof. I think the biggest challenge is, like I said, I think the biggest challenges up front had a lot to do with we chose the most painful application to go into the cloud first. That was, building that infrastructure, building that core baseline that's suitable. And then that next word is suitability, right? So we have generally taken the approach that kind of we're greenfielding everything because lifting and shifting is kind of not an option. Some of the baselines are just too old or just not very usefully, integrated into a cloud environment. So we have had to do a lot of shifting to help facilitate what I'll call like the contractors almost in the contracts that we work with, the integrators. Because a lot of times teams will come to us with this, they have the money, they've got the vision of going to the cloud, but they don't have a contract team that's kind of in front of their cloud migration.
Yeah.
And so we end up saying, okay, you're not going to lift and shift this really old thing into the cloud. That's not the point of cloud. The point of cloud is the opportunity, right? So like I'd say, generally speaking, our biggest challenges have been having a really good integrator to support those missions of migration, but then having a vendor that kind of helps focus. So like on the contracting side, we try to give enough scope so the applications aren't what we'll call like limited to, that specific microservice kind of thing. We're trying to make it so the vendor helps lead us in the right direction. Because a lot of times the contracts are, 18 months before technology is even there. And, I might choose, say like EMR today, but they might just Amazon's dropping new services every week. So they might drop a new service that's, better, stronger, faster, better the week after I finish the contract. And I'm kind of stuck. So I think working kind of hand in hand with the integrators, not the challenge, but the challenge we have to constantly overcome.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. How about you? I'm sure you've not seen any challenges, Tyson.
I was going to say database migration. That's the biggest challenge. I mean, there's so many, I don't want to say issues, but there's so many things with the database that have to happen. It's easy to containerize. I mean, CBP, most of our application teams have already containerized their applications on-prem. So those are an easy move up to the cloud. The databases, we've got several large monolithic databases, hundreds of terabytes each, with multiple applications, having their data in there. We have a lot of database connections, not only internally, but also with some of our external or other OIT directorates, where they have like AQ interfaces and things like that. So, I mean, somebody said the other day in one of the sessions, it's a hairball. Maybe that was you, but it's basically a hairball, and you have to detangle that before you can move the data, and then just the logistics of moving such massive quantities of data to the cloud, and then add on top of all of that, we're converting from Oracle to Postgres. So it's the biggest technical problem. So, with that said, we're looking at different approaches. It really depends on the application. So we've done a lot of racking and stacking applications and databases, and there are some where we can probably move the data with the application as a complete package to the cloud. But others, we may be looking at a hybrid approach where we have the apps running in cloud, writing back to the on-prem databases.
Yeah.
I'd like to keep this to 30 seconds, but that database complexity we were absolutely facing. We were migrating off of Oracle as well. A lot of tight direct data interconnections between our systems. And one thing I'd suggest for anyone that's looking to do large-scale migrations to the cloud that helped us tremendously, we had a very poor history in the past of migrating or modernizing individual systems because of those complexities. So we flipped it and we converted all of our databases from Oracle to the new platform and migrated all of our databases into the cloud, into an architecture designed for the enterprise to host all applications before we ever migrated the first app. So we had all of our production data there, so that when we started refactoring the applications and migrating them kind of group by group, all of those external dependencies on data were already there, and that helped to ease that complexity.
I think that's a great approach. Follow the data.
And I got like one little piece about that you kind of brought up is we learned to question everything, right? We had what I'll say like 80 different little applications that had their own little specific mission, because that's what we had to do back in 2004 when we developed these things. Now it's like, hey, we can actually draw a string across all these data sets, and we don't have to have 20 different applications. You can have one, and it does all the different views or does the different services. And a lot of it was, why do we have 20 separate RMF packages? Why do we have 20 separate programs? It could be one, streamlined program.
Yeah. Actually, hold that thought, because I'm going to come back to you on that RMF stuff. What kind of challenges have you run into as an SI? How have you supported our agency partners?
Great question. So, I think truthfully, like building a single greenfield application in the cloud and going fast is actually quite easy. The bigger issue is to do things at scale, right? So, the third rails that I've seen us run into, right, are things like, the ability to deploy software and deploy a change. If I had a penny for every time we actually were ready to go and we had to wait for a service request to kind of be approved by a change control board, like 2 or 3 weeks. So you get this kind of, lack of linearity, if you will, between what you can do. It's like having a Ferrari and having like donut wheels on it, where and it's a profoundly frustrating thing, right? So I would say that there's a lot of tech things at the scale level that I think have to be kind of worked through, right? But I'd say like the biggest issues are kind of people things, right? So in terms of like people being afraid that their jobs are going to go away, people being like I would say the cloud and cloud adoption at scale is already here, but it's just unevenly distributed, right? So I would say that the governance thing can't be overstated. Like Gabe and your AT on a day is a huge deal, right? So having a CISO be comfortable with the controls and what you can inherit, and actually what a practical way is to kind of move my ATO from here to there, that's very uneven, right? In terms of how do I kind of, like organizations who adopt Agile, organizations who adopt CI/CD are going to do far better, right? But working through the change, actually, frankly, upskilling folks, not just the SIs, but also, the feds. So people are kind of aware of this and actually can kind of leverage it and aren't afraid of it. People don't fear change, they fear uncertainty. And actually really being able to understand, what it is I need to do to manage to govern. Like, what does a NOC need to do? What does a SOC need to do? Like, who's accountable? Like, what does the shared accountability, shared responsibility model look like? And what are the new roles in terms of users of the cloud? Like, being thoughtful about, and even how to pay for it, and what, like, the sticker shock, and actually how to continuously modernize, right? Like, there's a lot of squishy things that aren't really bits and bytes of moving thing from A to B, that actually I would just kind of put in a bigger bucket of organizational readiness, and actually, frankly, like, who's going to say who gets to do what, and how fast we can go. All those big questions, I think, have to be kind of worked through.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Gabe said earlier. For me, the toughest challenge has been around contractual processes not catching up to technology, and we've experienced so much of a setback because of that. But let me move on to my next question around zero trust. So the need for zero trust looms really largely upon us, especially given a record number of incidents around cyber last year. And so I think you folks, Gabe especially, are doing some interesting stuff with zero trust. I would like to hear a little more about that, and also a little more on how you came to achieve ATO in a day. Is that a myth or is that real?
No, it's real, right? So we've taken the approach of what I'll call close everything except what's needed, it's a high-level term, right? But we restrict as much as possible, and we open up. So my AWS guy is out here somewhere over there, and he constantly complains to me that we're really a big pain, but he also says that's the value of it. When tenants come to us, they go through a daunting process of having to get into the cloud, and because we're putting a lot of guardrails in place, whether it's from policy, whether it's from IAM, whether it's from IDM, all the various infrastructure pieces. But it allows us, so when you as a tenant, you're getting an AMI that's already accredited, you're getting infrastructure that's already accredited, you're getting services that are already wired together and already accredited, and you have the guidelines in place. And because of that, we're able to allow our, the CISOs to make a really easy decision process based on what you're using, how you're utilizing those services, and quite frankly, how you decide to interact with the cloud and your customers. So the ATO of the day process, where our stuff was in support of the Afghan vetting mission, that was a very, very quick turn. We got very little notice we were going to have to, support that operation. But it allowed us to take, SageMaker along with some databases, OpenSearch, and integrate this whole product. And there was nothing that required a specific ATO within that procedure. You're documenting your process of what you did from a CM process standpoint, but the core capabilities were all accredited services that the tenants were able to utilize and drive forward into a cloud solution. And it was feeding data back to all the way up to the top of the food chain. I was working with CBP, and it was a really, really great mission to support.
Yeah. So speaking about CBP, what are you doing to adopt zero trust for the cloud?
Not my area of expertise. I'll just put that up front. But we are adopting it. We have Passenger Systems has almost 90 applications, and the users range from just public-facing websites that anybody can access, all the way down to our law enforcement sensitive systems. And so, imagine trying to do the authentication and the authorization for all of that range of applications and user bases. But we work with the Cybersecurity Directorate that's also under OIT and their ICAM team, and they are sort of modernizing, moving to, I think Okta is one of the tools that they're using for that. So kind of moving off of our sort of legacy authentication process for one of our biggest systems, TEX, which kind of was managing that piece of it for a lot of our applications. So we're moving away from one application, TEX, managing all that authentication to this Okta tool.
Sure. And at ATF, Have you started the process? How would you approach?
We're still building toward, I'd say we're laying the groundwork for it. Zero trust isn't something you just jump to, and there's a lot that needs to kind of get built up for it. A few of the things, one is just putting in that kind of adaptive infrastructure that we talked about helps us to evolve toward the changes that are needed and integrate some of the new capabilities and processes. Working towards centralized identity, that's crucial.
Yes.
For the trusted exchanges. Moving away from the periodic ATO mindset more toward ongoing authorizations and continuous monitoring is crucial. And we're doing, DOJ is doing some pilots in general and evaluations of some of the tools that can help support it. You'd mentioned Okta, there's CrowdStrike, Zscaler, a number of others that can play pieces that help you get you toward that zero trust mindset and that ability to really step away from the VPNs and that boundary security mindset. So we're kind of tackling it on all fronts, kind of working our way there.
It is a change in paradigm, isn't it? Complete change in paradigm. So Peter, how can an SI, what are some of the things you're doing to help with, one, figuring out where agencies are with their zero trust posture today and how they can move to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, so there's three things that we're focusing on, right? So I would say, as you move to the cloud, I mean, one of the things that probably is less discussed, but actually is critical to success in the cloud migration is, okay, getting serious about your identity repos and figure out how you're going to do access management on the cloud, right? So if you're building, infrastructure as code, you're thinking, okay, well, I can govern access to my applications, to my data, to my networks, and I have to kind of get serious about my identities, right? So a really good, thoughtful SI, as they think about landing zones and infrastructure as code, there's a lot of ingredients in how you're going to bake that cake, and especially, what you can and can't constrain, and actually how you're going to monitor it. That you're going to get it basically just by adopting good practices. So that would be kind of like the really obvious thing. The things that we're doing kind of differently with the EO, I would say, would be kind of like in a little process would be. I happen to be a big fan of the well-architected framework review process. Just because it's rigorous and you do workload by workload and you look at opportunities for resilience and for security and compliance. But now in my mind, all of us in this room are needing to think about a sixth or seventh leg, right? Which is how do I touch a workload and actually incrementally kind of mature it. And we're actually doing kind of, I would say, broader consulting capabilities and engagements too, right? So we have early kind of days right now, we're doing kind of zero trust maturity playbooks, kind of similar to what the 5 pillars of the CISA model look like. But frankly, meeting customers where they are, understanding what their investments are, recognizing that Rome won't be built in a day, and what are your critical assets and where to kind of start. Like what is the process to look like? Because it can be overwhelming. And actually that's probably the big observation we have is it's hard. And zero trust, despite what some of the vendors on the floor are going to tell you, zero trust is a pattern, and it's an architectural kind of a standard, and it's kind of an evolution in terms of how you're protecting your crown jewels, right? So it's a journey, and we're going to be on this journey for a long time. The priority right now is to actually kind of look at where the crown jewels are, protect those, get good at kind of changing the adoption. It's really kind of like adopting cloud, right? It's a whole paradigm shift in terms of security and how to implement security. And I think we're starting.
And you said it kind of like in a weird way, right? Like that's why we're greenfielding everything, right? So because if you're taking stuff and lifting and shifting, you're not going to do zero trust really well. It's an impossible pattern in some cases to throw them on top of old applications. So if you're implementing new, then you can implement that as part of your code versus trying to shove zero trust into something that's not going to be very trustworthy. Yeah,
that's an interesting approach to take, but I don't know that everybody can afford to do that, start greenfield.
I question that.
Which is good, which leads to my next question. But Peter, I wanted to say, along with the assessments, I think, are you also providing things like a roadmap for people to say, here's your assessment, here are the results, here's how to get to where you need to get to?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is where you are, and actually here's what your roadmaps look like, and here's what should be done first, second, and third, which is actually, this is one of the most valuable things. We can talk about the tech, but actually understanding where I am and actually how to kind of get myself out of this kind of position and to incrementally kind of get wins on the board and start building confidence, and frankly, kind of helping people understand what this pattern is. That's exactly what the playbook looks like.
So speaking about greenfield and brownfield, you folks from CBP side, Tyson, you have a challenging mandate in front of you. You have to move all your applications into cloud over the next 2 years, I think. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the approaches you've taken to prioritize applications as you move to the cloud. Is it based on cost? Is it based on performance? Is it based on customer experience? Is it based on the complex set of integration points you have, both within DHS and outside DHS? What do you do to get through all this and say, these are the applications that we're moving, and here's how we move them?
Basically, all of those things. So I mentioned before that we're racking and stacking. So we're looking at the database side of it, but we're also looking at transaction volumes for the applications. Some of these are primary applications, meaning these are the ones that you would encounter coming in an airport coming from overseas. Those are millions a day of transactions. We're looking at the SLAs, like a CBP officer at a primary booth there, they really have 5 to 6 seconds to make a decision, and so those response times have to be almost instantaneous. Looking at just the database, like I mentioned before, the database size, the complexity, the number of interfaces. So kind of all of those factors, we're almost through that process of racking and stacking. And some applications have already moved. Like I said before, we have all flavors, and we have some applications that are already operating 100% in cloud, and they decommissioned everything on-prem. Whereas we have some that really have only just started containerizing their applications. So they're just starting the cloud migration journey. And those tend to be our biggest systems with the most interdependencies. So there's definitely some tough ones to crack there, some tough nuts to crack. But just that racking and stacking process, I mean, everybody wants to take the low-hanging fruit and migrate that to cloud, which we'll probably do that. But those big ones are just going to take more time. I mean, that's all it really comes down to, and working a little bit more closely with them, giving them the resources and the support that they need. Because on top of this, as I mentioned, the mission. I mean, we have. Just watch the news. I mean, there was Ukraine today. There was Afghanistan last summer. There was MPP, which is the Migrant Protection Protocols. So every month there's something new, and we only have so many developers on each application team, and the mission comes first. We have to support the mission. So cloud, even though it's a program priority, it still comes in second to the mission.
You have to keep flying the plane
Yeah.
while you're changing out stuff.
Yeah.
Yes. You have also successfully migrated a couple of applications. Tell us a little more about how you've done that. How have you been successful?
I'll start out by first telling you how we were not successful,
Okay.
and then what we changed to allow us to succeed on it. We started out with that mindset of build like for like, just pay off the technical debt to get us to that point where we could start the continuous improvement. So we started out thinking we have the source code to all of our applications, so we have the roadmap that we need to rebuild that functionality on a modern architecture, modern framework with all the automation and everything wrapped around it. That assumed that all of that source code actually worked. And we discovered through some painful efforts and trials that a great deal of the source code did not work, or did not work as expected, and was not a reliable roadmap. And fundamentally, and this is really embarrassing for someone that's been an advocate of Agile for as long as I have been, we made Agile 101 mistake. We did IT purely within the IT shop because our mission folks are busy, incredibly busy, they have important work, and we had the roadmap, we had the source code. So we thought we could just rebuild that. So honestly, we had about a throwaway year where we spent trying to follow that roadmap, bringing it back to the mission side and discovering that it was so far off mark, that what we had in our backlog remaining was not reliable, and we largely had to start over by trying to rebuild and extract the functions not out of existing records or existing source code, but out of the heads of our subject matter experts that actually knew the systems. And that came in the form of a request to the executive leadership that we need some of your best subject matter experts to join our modernization team effectively full-time and become part of the team. And that's a hard thing to do. But they went full in, and we got a handful of some of their true best experts. And they were in every single day testing in our test environment, writing the stories and validating the acceptance criteria, and first helped get us to the point where the backlog was reliable and actually described what was truly needed. And they worked with us every day for years, refining that, adding in new stuff as they get to points testing, identifying it, and there is absolutely no way we could ever have succeeded without their commitment and without bringing them in. So top lesson learned is don't ever try to do IT. Agile, whatever, don't do IT without the mission subject matter experts involved, or it is not going to be what they need.
I think that's a really good lesson. Involve the end users right from the very beginning, yes. So Gabe, just quickly, because we have a few minutes left, but I'm very curious, you said you've used cloud for greenfield applications, right? So how do you run that? Do you run the application in parallel with the legacy application, and then what makes, when do you figure out you have to retire the legacy application? What's the process
so
there?
it's a big governance process, right? So we, as I kind of mentioned, we're doing a lot of the RMF stuff for the cloud while we're trying to bring tenants on board. So it's kind of a parallel process in where we're working to get these tenants into the environment, make sure they have the services they require. Some tenants only need EC2 and storage. It's a very simple setup for them. Then you got tenants that need like way more complex services, system manager or something a little bit more, outside the box that we have to work with them to make sure the services that they're looking for are available. So the governance process that we have implemented allows us to help kind of rack and stack what things that we're kind of accomplishing at any given point. And as you kind of stated, we can't turn any of our stuff off. So we have to kind of do both at the same time. So the legacy stuff will typically be kind of run, and we kind of pause on any sort of future development on those while we kind of get the new system up and running, and then we kind of do like the light switch. And so then there should never be a user impact. Same look and feel for the most part, or ish, same mission that they need to be able to accomplish has to be able to be done. But the general piece there is just to ensure that we're able to kind of rack and stack as our capabilities are available to tenants, and then some of it, like I said, is very natural just because it's an easy application or whatever. So.
Yeah, it is a process, isn't it? You don't want the end users to not use it because they're not happy.
I let people above me make the decisions on what they want to prioritize, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you, change the question a little bit. Gone are the days where cloud is just used for compute and storage. Our CSPs provide many emerging technologies, right? Looking forward, there's some quantum stuff going on. There's blockchain, there is AI/ML, there is edge technologies. So I would love to hear from you on where you think these technologies are going, what technologies are relevant to all our government agencies' missions.
Well, thank you, Lakshmi. I guess this is kind of what gets me most excited, right? Is hearing the mission stories, right, and the ability to, like this point of cloud allows us just to go that much faster, but like the predominant part of the conversation we're having is the classic app dev and analytic solutions that we can solve, right? But what I'm most excited about is like having gone to reInvent and just listening to where AWS is going, and not just AWS, is I would characterize it as the ubiquity of cloud, or the fact that we can, whether or not we're calling it the edge or the tactical edge, but if I looked at the executive order for customer experience, one of the areas that the White House actually called out was the humble aviation checkpoint. So how do we provide a better experience at the humble aviation checkpoint? Well, imagine like by being able to leverage edge-based computing, the ability to kind of have AI at the edge and back at the data lake, and actually continuously do better with AI, to be able to deploy applications, actually have more advanced networking capabilities that actually kind of bridge and allow us to kind of push quite a bit of data between the edge and the backbone, and mixed reality. So the world I see in that simple use case would be like having all of the things that are connected, having digital twins of those things, understanding the current maintenance, the maintenance posture of each of these items, being able to say, you know what, lane 15 in Dulles Airport needs to be taken down now because it's going to come down the next hour, so I'm kind of avoiding a lot of backlogs. And I have my TSOs walking around and being able to say, well, we're getting this data that may be kind of flagging a risk, and I'm also seeing that something is going on with that bag, and being able to use kind of a mixed reality to actually kind of look at everybody in situ to be able to make better risk decisions. Like having the ability to have mission analytics at the edge, being able to deploy smart analytics, to be able to kind of use mixed reality. I'm a really big fan of mixed reality as an important kind of enabler, being able to kind of like, you know, give you superpowers so you can actually look into bags, look into, and actually look at risk to be able to perform the mission that much better. So I think actually, as much as this conference has been going on for 10 years, I think we're really just getting started. I think being able to drive cloud and modern capabilities right to the edge of the mission is super exciting.
Sci-fi taking on a new life.
It is,
This
absolutely.
is beating sci-fi. So how about you folks? Let's ask Tyson, where do you think you will be using emerging technologies?
I think our biggest issue going forward is the duplication of data. We have data sets that we generate in passenger systems, and then we have other groups, other components that pull copies of that data. They might do other stuff with it, but and I think this is probably common to a lot of government agencies, is just there's too many copies of data out there, and with the storage costs that, in the cloud, data ends up being one of your, storage ends up being one of your largest costs. So one of the things we're going to be looking at is like the data lake concept, where our data goes into a place along with everybody else's data, and that's the common repository that everybody can use for whatever their needs are, whether it's reporting or querying or whatever. So that component A over here isn't creating something that B is also copying, and then component C is also getting a copy of what they need, and goes on and on.
Yeah, it's probably moving into data as a service shortly.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about?
I'm excited about a bunch of them, but I'm trying to stay focused on building the landing gear for my plane and getting all of our applications into the cloud. Then I'm going to let myself indulge in the serverless and a number of the things that I'm really excited to pivot toward, but I'm keeping my blinders on for the moment.
It's cool. And Gabe?
He just mentioned the data lake. I actually call it the data dinghy because it's like a little smaller than what you were. We're like a little like lake inside there, but I think we're kind of sort of starting to take that approach of, we duplicate everything, especially in our environment, and then how we can leverage that sort of structure to empower, analysts or data scientists or whatever to actually utilize that data in unique ways, because applications don't always meet that intent, and we shouldn't be making programs to solve simple problems. So.
Great. This has been a most insightful conversation. So how about a big round of applause for our panelists? Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
On time, so thank you so much for the panel. I learned a lot, and look forward to learning more with you folks.